right, the longest layoff of my live poker career is officially over as we are back here at Peppermill, five-handed, no limit. Gonna be jumping in that, and well, let's hope I don't get things started post-quarantine with a loss. So though it had been a while since I had done it, per usual, I buy in for $1,000 playing single $5 blind, five-handed, no-limit hold'em. First hand, a grinder under the gun, who never gives me any action, opens to 15, and I pick up pocket kings on the button. I only make it 30 here, because he is so tough to get action from, as I mentioned. To my surprise, the blind cold calls, as does the original raiser, so with 90 in, the flop comes ace, queen, jack, two hearts. It gets checked to me, and on a terrible flop, I check behind. The turn's a 7, the small blind checks, and under the gun, bets out 2/3 pot, putting in 60. This is never a bluff into multiple opponents, so I make the fold. And we are off to an unfortunate start, having been dealt kings the first hand. The next hand, under the gun, opens to 15, and I have ace-king in the cutoff. I 3-bet it to 40, and the blind, an unknown woman, cold calls. The original raiser folds, so with 95 in it comes queen 10-7 rainbow. She checks to me, and I check it back, feeling that just after losing a big pot, she's never going to want to fold a pair here. The turn's a 9, and she bets 60, and I decide to wait for a better spot. Next hand, I pick up king-queen in the cutoff, and I raise to 15. The button calls, so with 30 in, the flop comes 10-7-3, two diamonds. I bet 25, and he makes the call. So with 80 in, the turn comes a jack, giving me an open-ended straight draw. I bet 60. He hesitates and finally calls. So which in my mind, that ruled out flush draws given that hesitation. And with 200 in, we go to the river, which is highly above average for me. It comes an ace. I bet 125, and finally having made my hand, I then stop getting action as he lays it down. Next hand, under the gun opens to 15, and I'm in the blind with pocket eights. I make it 40, and he quickly calls. So with 80 in, we get a 7-3-3 flop, and I make a $50 bet, which in hindsight was really too much to get any ace-high peels, and he lays down pretty quickly. I didn't get video, but shortly after that, I lost about $150 when I flopped trips. A guy missed his flush draw, but happened to hit his straight draw on the river, kind of the perfect outcome for him. Shortly after that, the hijack limps, and I'm in the cutoff with 6-7 of hearts, and I overlimp. The button follows suit, and the blind decides to raise. He makes it 25, and ultimately what plays out is what I kind of describe a little league hand, meaning a bunch of limp calling, me myself being guilty of it. So with $100 in, the flop comes slightly above average, 4-5-8 rainbow. The blind bets full pot, making it 100, and I raise it to 225 to ensure that all of his overpairs don't fold. And sure enough, he calls. So the other players get out of the way, and we're heads up to a turn with 550 in, which comes the deuce of diamonds. He checks, and I bet 250, and he instantly jams all in. So I snap call, obviously, and we have a pot of about $1,600. Now, I turn over my hand, and it's a mistake that I tend to make in these all-in spots, thinking that my opponents are going to turn over as well. One rule that I wish were the same in cash games as it is in tournaments. But nevertheless, he never ends up showing his hand. I'm assuming it was an overpair, but regardless, our night has turned. Then I'm under the gun with ace-king of diamonds and raised to 15. I immediately get min raised to 30. The cutoff flats, and I come back over the top with a re-raise to 115. The hijack calls, and in the cutoff, back ships all in for 450. Now, I think I have an automatic shove here, especially given his line. To my surprise, after I do that, the hijack calls off his last 300 as well. So we have a $1,400 three-way all-in. And to my delight, 2 aces come right on the flop. Once again, I don't get to see my opponent's hands. I always feel kind of bad in these all-in spots when the board runs out and I'm holding a big hand and I'm simply not showing. I always feel that same courtesy should be extended to me, though it rarely is. But again, I digress on the rules. Either way, we take down a big pot and are up over $1,000 at that point. I play for about another hour with no real hands of note, though I did win a few more small ones, and a night that initially appeared to be headed in the wrong direction, losing with those kings right out of the gate, ends with a big win. All right, cashing out, booking just over a $1,500 win. So I am back, and I am back running good, as it appears. Me winning hands with ace-king, a very rare occurrence. All right, so a couple more things before we wrap up vlog 80. The first of which is another observation that I had after this return to live poker playing 5-handed. And by the way, if you're wondering, it did start 4-handed, but apparently right after they opened the poker room up, there was a call from gaming that came in and says, okay, we're making the switch to 5-handed. So there you go. 5-handed, definitely better than 4-handed. I've also noticed that when you're paying time rake, and that's what's happening at the Pep Mill right now, $6 a half hour time rake, which I like, a lot less people are going to be walking away from their seats. A lot fewer lobbyers when they're paying time. So even though the games are short-handed, they are going to be full generally with the players that are in the game, as opposed to the time where you're just paying the regular rake. People will get up constantly, and it's very annoying, especially when it's like not VIPs that do it, but grinders that want to leave their seats for an hour. It's just so obnoxious when that happens. That should not be tolerated. But with regards to the games themselves, I kind of went into it not really knowing how I should play. The funny part is, when you're playing a 5-handed game regularly, it's not when the game is supposed to be 5-handed, and there's a bunch of OMCs in there, and obviously OMCs hate playing short-handed. What will happen is, the OMCs don't even change the ranges they play, is what I've noticed. So they play ace-king, aces and kings, and a few pocket pairs when the game's 9-handed. Well, guess what? They do the same thing when it's 5-handed. So you have to run over these OMCs. Well, for a number of different reasons, right now we haven't seen nearly as many OMCs. And obviously a lot of them are higher risk, so they want to stay home, and that makes sense. But what I've noticed is, you're getting people who are over-adjusting, meaning they're playing way too many hands. And in this last session, there were a lot of young guys, a lot more unknowns than I've seen typically. And granted, it was a Friday night, but people are just way overdoing it. So I would actually recommend to you, if you're in the same spot, play fewer hands than you would normally play in a 5-handed game against typical competition, typical OMC type competition. Because I got myself in trouble in a few spots when I was thinking that my opponents might not be adjusting properly to the 5-handed structure, when in fact I was right. They were just over-adjusting as opposed to OMCs who typically under-adjust. One final note here. I mentioned on a previous vlog that my favorite show, Better Call Saul, which is my favorite show of all time, had a pretty good poker scene in it. Well, that has been completely outdone by the current show that I'm binge watching now, and that's Billions on Showtime. And for those of you that know the show, it's obvious as to why that show would have the better poker scene. And I won't spoil the outcome of the scene, but it's really good and worth watching. The player that wins the hand could have easily experienced one of the worst feelings in poker, when you have the right read, but the wrong outcome, essentially. Anyway, the show was created by Brian Koppelman and David Levine, the guys who wrote Rounders. So they were just basically saying, look, we got to get a poker scene in a show, and we have to outdo every other poker scene that's ever been in a show. We have to do it right. And they were just basically showing off, saying, look, we know more about poker than anyone else who's ever written for television before, and we're going to make this happen. So, Billions, I think it's in season 2, where you'll find that scene. And if you want to hack, I believe you can actually sign up for a free 30-day trial of Showtime. If you want to binge watch that, all you have to do is cancel it at the end. So there you go. I highly recommend it. That'll wrap it up for this edition of the vlog. As always, subscribe, like, follow Instagram, all that crap. I'll see you back here next time.